and we would move on. And if you didn't get it, that's great, because that's how we create that bell curve distribution. I'm going to be brutally honest, okay? So we've got to be clear on those pieces. There's some existing gaps that we want to admit we know exist here, exist everywhere in education. We've got misalignment from teacher to teacher. And if I asked you to raise your hand if you could name where that's happening, everyone in this room could do that. You know one teacher that does something different than another teacher, one that might grade harder or easier or different than another teacher. We know that exists. We've got inconsistent grading practice. We've got the misuse of extra credit. We've got to focus on point accumulation rather than content mastery. What I mean by that, when I was teaching and a student would not perform where they wanted to on an exam, they'd come and see me and they'd say, "Mr. Hay, I need some extra points. Is there some extra credit that I can do?" What we want them to say today is, "Mr. Hay, I didn't understand this learning target on this exam. How can I understand this?" Because it's now about mastery of learning, not about point accumulation. And that's where we're going to have that distinction between getting them into college. That's easy. We can do that. We're really good at that. And making sure that once they get into college, they're going to be successful in college. And that's the tougher piece. And that's where we need to look at that depth of knowledge and making sure that they're mastering all of the content that we expect them to master. This is the way that's the easiest way for me to describe it. This isn't how the researchers talk about it. It's not how educational people talk about it. But it's easy for me to think about it. It's going from Band-Aids to healing. And the way that I approach this, we've got this system from 100 years ago. And we've got a whole different purpose to meet today. We've got different objectives, different demands on us. So instead of changing the system to meet today's purposes, we've created a bunch of Band-Aids. We said, well, this doesn't quite work. So what am I going to do about it as a professional educator to make sure that these students have opportunities? Band-Aid number one is extra credit. I just described the situation to you. The student didn't perform where he needed to, but I think he's probably a student that's of the caliber where he could understand that. So in the old system, instead of making sure he understood it, we're going to do something that replaces those points. It's a Band-Aid, all right? Point accumulation. What am I talking about here? We used points. We would, as teachers, speaking from my own experience, we would assign significant points to different assignments, to different worksheets, etc., so that we could limit the amount to which a test affected a student's final grade. Because we weren't accurate in the way we were designing our tests or our assessments. We weren't doing it in a way where it was aligned with the learning targets, and we didn't demand mastery. There was no opportunity for students to be able to say, look, I didn't get this part, how can I get it? There was no relearning happening. So we did some other things to try and Band-Aid that old system. The bell curve. What I mean here, we've all been in classes, especially those of us who attended college, where the professor would say, you know what, that test, the way you performed, it doesn't reflect what I believe you can actually do. So they would curve the test. They would take that bell curve and push it up. It's another Band-Aid on the old system because we recognized the old system was not accurately reporting what we wanted it to report or accomplishing what it needed to accomplish for today. And then we've got the old high-stakes tests. And you remember the movement back from 1997 to go nationwide with high-stakes tests to be able to move beyond a grade. And that doesn't serve a good purpose for today's system either. So what we want to do, in my words, is move from Band-Aids to healing. So rather than extra credit that would replace points, I want to talk about reassessment so that when that student comes to me, I could say, what is it you didn't get? How can we get that? And then how can I understand that you got the mastery? And it might be as simple as you explain it to me. And you explain it to me because, Mary Beth, you weren't able to get it on the test, but you can explain it to me. And I say, you know what, you do understand this. And that to me is far more important than your ability to do some other extra credit assignment, okay? Point accumulation. We're going to move away from that to talk about actual learning. So instead of having a conversation about, I only got a 97%, we want the conversation to be, I didn't get this part, how do I get it? So that the student takes ownership of their learning and they understand that it's mastery that we're looking for. We want to move away from that bell curve where we have teachers that had to grade on a curve because it was creating a distribution that didn't work. We want to create assessments that are actually going to be accurate in measuring the learning targets and then report out on a rubric that's very clear for you to understand. I couldn't tell you what the difference is between a 92 and a 93 other than that's what it adds up to be. on a rubric system, I can tell you very clearly what the difference is between a 5 and a 4, or a 3, or a 2, or 1. Okay? So we want to have a clear reporting structure. These have been in place at many of the elementary levels across our state for some time. A clear reporting structure so that students understand what it is they're expected to learn, they understand where they're at in the learning, and what they need to do to get to the full learning. We also want parents to understand that, teachers, administrators, counselors, everybody who's involved in making sure that that child gets it. A couple of thoughts on reassessment. For those who are newer to the term or wondering, is this some radical idea? It's not. But for those of you who need to understand what it is, this is in place of what used to be extra credit and point accumulation. It's talking about, instead of doing this extra stuff to get the grade, let's focus on what it is that you didn't learn the first time. It raises the expectations of students. They can no longer go off and do an extra credit assignment. They can no longer perform other tasks for the teacher that take the place of actual learning. They have to now learn. It's critical. It focuses students on learning the content. It follows remediation and supplemental instruction, and that's key. It's not just showing up tomorrow and saying, can I take the test again? One, you wouldn't be taking the same test. One, it may not be a test at all. An assessment could be a paper, it could be an oral review, it could be a discussion, it could be any number of things. But between assessment and reassessment, something's got to take place. We need some remediation, some extra instruction between that student and that teacher. And that looks different depending on the content area, okay? And then the reassessment is delivered before school, after school, during study hall, during lunch, or during class. We recognize that we've got students who are running from 6 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night with all of their extracurriculars and don't have a study hall. So we're going to work with those students to make this happen. Now, having said all of that, I very clearly understand that this is not happening, and it's not happening uniformly in this building and in the middle school right now. So I want to be clear. I understand that criticism, and we accept that criticism. That's why we're working right now to create some uniformity by rolling something up that we can hold our staff accountable to across the board, so that there's a uniform system, so that you know what the expectations are. And then if it's not happening, you pick up the phone and call me and say, Mr. Hay, we've got a problem. That's why we're doing this, so we recognize the criticisms of the existing system. The new expectations. Students must demonstrate mastery of the learning targets. I've said that a few times. Teachers will use common learning targets, common assessments, and common grading practice. That means that 2 teachers who teach biology will be using the same learning targets, they're going to be using the same common assessments, and they're going to be aligning their grading practices. Now, when I say going to be doing it, I don't mean 10 years from now. I mean, we're laying out the expectations today that this is in place on day 1 next year, so that you know what the expectations are, the students do. And again, if it's not happening, you know how to pick up the phone, call me, call the counselor, call the associate principals, and make sure that your kid is getting the education that they deserve. Students are a big part of this. I met with the students 2 days ago, and this puts students in the driver's seat. This is a responsibility for them. It puts them back in control of their learning. So students will use formative feedback to gauge their own performance and prepare for benchmark assessments. Those of you in the room from the elementary schools in our district probably